May 17th, 2023 Board of Douglas County Commissioners 5:30 business meeting. We want to welcome those of you who are here with us at the courthouse and those of you joining us online. Some of you may be here to provide public comment. The Board of Douglas County Commissioners welcomes public comment and in advance thanks you for following these procedures. Each action item on the agenda will offer an opportunity for relevant public comment about that topic. We ask that you wait until the agenda item you're here for comes up for discussion. Comments related to agenda items are welcomed after the board has had an opportunity to discuss the topic. The Board of County Commissioners will invite comments on topics not included in the agenda during our general public comment time. That will be directly after considering the consent agenda. This is a time for addressing issues not on today's agenda, but related to the general business of the Douglas County Commission. We'll first call on folks who are here in person, and then we'll turn to online commenters who are here with us tonight. If you're on Zoom, please plan to use the raise your hand function when it comes time and listen for staff to call your name. All comments will be limited to 3 minutes, and we ask everyone to give their full name and Douglas County residence for our meeting minutes. All public comments should be directed to the Douglas County Commission. Campaigning for public office is not allowed. We reserve the right to mute and remove any speaker who is vulgar, rude, or inappropriate. The public should also know that comments received by the commission during our meetings do not represent the views of Douglas County government. If visual aids are used during the meeting, the presenter will share their screen. Please know that online participants will not be able to view them without a computer, smartphone, or tablet during tonight's meeting. Materials are published online for your reference. Lastly, a recording of this meeting will be available on our YouTube page and website. Does it sound like the sound is going in and out, or is that just my old ears? Okay, I'll try to stay closer. Okay, on tonight's agenda, everybody, we have a proclamation first for Mental Health Month in Douglas County. Then we'll have our consent agenda. There are 4 items on our consent agenda. We'll do general public comment, and then our 2 regular agenda items are for psychiatric supplemental support for Heartland CHC, and then a planning department item for a conditional use permit for limited solar energy conversion. And we'll finish up our meeting with appointments and commissioner and administrator miscellaneous before we adjourn. We'll start with the proclamation. Patrick, if you'd like to come up, I'll read the proclamation. If you have any comments, you're welcome to make those afterwards. Commissioner Reed, I think, is tracking down the proclamation so we can get that signed. Whereas the U.S. Surgeon General states that mental health is fundamental to health, personal well-being, family, and interpersonal relationships, and contributes to community and society. And whereas mental illness affects 1 in 4 Americans every year, regardless of age, gender, race, ethnicity, religion, and economic status. And whereas the U.S. Surgeon General has found that a range of treatments exist for most mental disorders, and the efficacy of mental health treatments are well documented. And whereas Douglas County, Kansas has made a commitment to community-based systems of mental health care for all residents. And whereas the guiding principles of community mental health have always been comprehensiveness, cost efficiency, effective management, and high quality and consumer responsive services. And whereas Mental Health America, the National Council for Community Behavioral Health Care, and the Burt Nash Community Mental Health Center observe Mental Health Month every May to raise awareness and understanding of mental health and illness. Now, therefore, the Board of County Commissioners of Douglas County, Kansas, do hereby proclaim the month of May 2023 as Mental Health Month in Douglas County and call upon citizens, governmental agencies, public and private institutions, businesses, and schools to recommit our community to increasing awareness and understanding of mental illness and the need for appropriate and accessible services for all people with mental illness. Adopted this day, May 17th of May 2023. Patrick, do you have any words you'd like to share?
Thank you, Chairman Kelly, Commissioners Reed and Willie, County Administrator Raplinsky, for the opportunity to be here and recognize Mental Health Awareness Month. Our theme for this past year was You Belong. And for the last 72 years, the Burt Nash Center has made a commitment to the community that we will be that safety net for anyone who needs help. Last year, we served close to 5,000 clients. And as we work to fulfill our mission of responding to needs, restore lives, and build a healthy community, I want to share with you some of the incredible strides the center has made these past 12 months. We challenged ourselves to meet not just one, but two national standards of excellence. We achieved both last summer. We became a certified community behavioral health clinic, making us the first 501c3 in the nation to achieve certification all on its own without funding through a demonstration project, expansion grant, or any direct state or municipal funding. The second achievement was receiving a 3-year accreditation of excellence from the Commission on the Accreditation of Rehabilitation Facilities. Out of 2,100 standards that were reviewed, we only needed to improve on 13. Third, our team implemented a new way of delivering a full range of intensive and highly integrated services to our most vulnerable neighbors who have been diagnosed with a serious mental illness. This new program is called Assertive Community Treatment, or ACT. Fourth, in partnership with Kansas Suicide Prevention Headquarters and our other behavioral health partners, we activated the new mobile response team in early September alongside the nationwide 988 suicide and crisis lifeline. Next, we were able to expand our homeless outreach team this past year, more than doubling our team members who are out in the community serving those impacted by houselessness. And of course, we were focused on working with our county partners to fully open the new treatment and recovery center, which began its phased opening on April the 10th. The observation and stabilization units will open May 25th. And after that point, we will be open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We are honored by the trust and faith the county and our community have put in us in having us operate the treatment and recovery center. This list of accomplishments was made possible because of the support of our generous supporters and many of our others in our community, including Douglas County. And although we've expanded and implemented new transformative programs, we have so much more to do to break the destructive cycle of untreated mental illness. We remain committed to serving anyone who comes through our doors, regardless of their ability to pay. And we are creating a culture that's inclusive of race, gender identity, faith, spirituality, ability, and sexual orientation. Please know it's okay to not be okay, because at the Burt Nash Center, you belong. Thank you for your continued support.
Thank you, Patrick. Commissioner Willie has your proclamation there, and I think it's really important to say that the achievements that Patrick highlighted should not be underestimated. Those are huge achievements, and congratulations to Burt Nash and our community for those that work. All right, we'll move on to our consent agenda. Commissioners, any item on the consent agenda you'd like to have removed for further discussion? Okay, any member of the public like to remove an item from the consent agenda for further conversation? All right, seeing none, commissioners, I take a motion to approve the consent agenda.
It's Commissioner Reed. I move to approve items 2.1 through 2.4.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, passes 3-0. Okay, we'll move on to our general public comment. We have Ruth and Marcia, and Ruth and Marcia. I just want to make sure we have a solar item that's coming up later. If you're here to speak on the solar item, we ask that you wait until that item comes up on our agenda. If you have a general public comment item on something not on our agenda, now would be the time for that. Okay. Go ahead. Touch the button so that the light turns green. There you go. And make sure you're nice and close to that microphone.
Am I good now? My name is Dan Cady. I have a neighbor who's a fireman. He works for the fire department. I talked to him today and I said, "What do you need?" He said, "We need people." He said, "It's god awful. We need people and we need help with the homeless situation. We're picking up the same people all the time, and it's been going on for years." Yeah, it's nice that Burt Nash is working on stuff like that, but what are the results? I go to the farmer's market on Saturday, and walk by people sleeping on the sidewalk. Y'all have done nothing about it. Thank you.
Ruth? Ruth, you're up next.
My name is Ruth Roselle, and I live north of Lawrence off of Wellman Road. I do feel like this is going in and out. You can hear? Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to speak and the hard work that you do as commissioners. I want to speak in regards to the proposed West Gardner solar project, so a different solar project than tonight's agenda. I've listened to the recordings on March 29th discussion and all the public comments since, and I want to address an area that's not been mentioned much so far, and that is the larger context for that decision, which is the climate crisis. I think most people now understand that the climate is changing, that it is largely due to greenhouse gas pollution from burning fossil fuels, and that is resulting in more intense weather disasters, heat, and drought. The March report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is made up of the world's most knowledgeable climate scientists, warns us that there must be deep and immediate reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, and that there is a rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. What this means is that as quickly as possible, the world needs to transition from using fossil fuel to using clean energy, such as solar and wind. Much of this needs to occur in this decade. This will require the expansion of utility scale solar as rapidly as possible. With the West Gardner Solar Project, Douglas County has the opportunity to be part of the solution to the climate crisis. We need energy to live our lives, and if we cannot keep burning fossil fuels, we will need an immense amount of clean energy. We need rooftop and community solar, but it's not nearly enough. And besides, what is easiest to do? To make a decision that allows a company to invest their money into building utility scale solar, or to somehow find the money for 32,000 families to put rooftop solar on their homes, on average, the number that would be required for the similar amount of energy generation. If you say no to utility scale solar, how are we going to get to 100% clean energy, which is essential for a livable future? As commissioners of Douglas County, I'm asking you to consider not only the fears and concerns of those who worry about the changes that utility solar will bring to the countryside, but also consider your responsibility to make decisions that will result in a good and livable future for our children, our grandchildren, and future generations. I ask that you help Douglas County be part of the solution and a leader in addressing the climate crisis. Thank you so much.
Marcia? Okay, thanks, Marcia. Okay, we'll close. Is there anyone online, Sarah? Okay, we'll close public comment and move on to our first regular agenda item for psychiatry supplemental support for Heartland CHC and Bob Tryansky. Hi, Bob.
Good evening. Good evening, commissioners. This evening, we are seeking your approval to take supplemental dollars as part of the psychiatric supplemental that has been allocated every year through our budget process for the last 5 years and redirect some of the funds that we anticipated would go towards providers at Bert Nash, toward Heartland CHC to redirect the $121,500 because Heartland has had the opportunity to bring a child psychiatrist to our community, and our partners and Heartland are very excited about that. Just to give you some context, beginning in 2017 in the budget process, the County Commission made a significant investment in helping our partners to be able to increase the number of providers in the community. We started that effort in 2018 by supporting and offsetting the cost between revenue and expense for 2 providers, one at Heartland and one at Bert Nash, 2 psychiatrists and an APRN at each agency. Over time, the needs have fluctuated and the opportunities have ebbed and flow in terms of how to best utilize resources to be able to support an entire spectrum of med services. So those efforts have included things such as investing in physician's assistants to support the med services team at Bert Nash, investing in a psychiatric resident clinical rotation. And so over time, we have tried to keep that psychiatric supplemental flexible so that we can respond to staff turnover, new opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. So in 2022, the budget allocation was $400,000, $320,000 to support providers at Bert Nash, and $80,000 kind of in that flexible funding to be available if another provider came to town. There has been turnover at Bert Nash. We have a full-time medical director now at the TRC. Bert Nash is seeking to replace those providers, and this opportunity has come to Heartland. So what Heartland has proposed and the psychiatric infrastructure has reviewed and endorsed, that the psychiatric infrastructure group has reviewed and endorsed, is redirecting $121,500 this year to go towards bringing that new provider on board at Heartland. That investment represents less than the total cost that Heartland is making to bring that provider to town. And then as part of their supplemental request, part of their budget request for the 2024 budget, Heartland is seeking another $121,500. So the total investment would be $243,000 over 18 months. That would support this provider with a 10% reduction in support between year 1 and year 2. And this request was reviewed very thoroughly by our partners, which include Bert Nash, KU Med, LMH Health, DECA, and Heartland through the psychiatric infrastructure work group. So that's just to give you an overview and some context. I'm going to invite Julie Brandstrom and Liz Keever from Heartland to be here for any questions, and we will stand for that.
Thank you.
All right. Do you have you're just ready for questions, right?
Yeah, if you
Okay,
have them,
super.
sure.
Questions, commissioners? Okay. I think we may have some questions after public comment, so thanks for being there. I just have one question, and it's related to the fact that this is tied to a supplemental request in our, if that supplemental request as part of our budget process is not approved, what plans do you have in that case?
That's a great question. We are really hopeful that it will be approved. We think that there is a tremendous need in this community. This is a really unique opportunity. This provider sought Heartland out because they desire to practice in an integrated care alongside of pediatricians. We gave you a little handout, but the need is well documented that there are many individuals right now who are being managed by pediatricians that really would benefit from the services of a psychiatrist. And so we strongly believe that this is a worthy ask that would meet a tremendous need in the community. I feel confident that that would be supported by all of the partner agencies and in the psych infrastructure group as well.
This Commissioner Reed, I just want to, I appreciate that, but it also is necessary for us to understand if we're being asked right now for half of the money with a strong hope and general expectation that the other half of the money will come. What if it doesn't? What's the contingency? Have you talked about that?
I mean, I think we would likely seek out additional grant opportunities that might help support. We know that there potentially could be some federal grant opportunities, perhaps some other foundations. We know that, eventually this provider will pay for himself through visits that we can bill for. But in the beginning, while a provider is building up a panel, having that additional support is critical.
And that was my follow-up question is, this is for 2 years of funding. Is it assumed then that the third year of funding, that position would be paying for itself and there wouldn't be an additional ask? Is that-
I want to clarify, Commissioner, this is for 1 year of funding for 6 months for 2023. You will have a request for 2024 that you will decide as a part of that budget.
But the full proposal that's in front of us, even though we're only voting on part of it, is the 18 months at 243,000.
No.
No.
It is the motion is 121,500 for 2023 psychiatric supplemental.
And an assumption of also funding in 2024. So we're bringing
Nope.
someone on.
No, I don't know that that assumption is guaranteed. That's the nature of the questions we have.
Okay.
And these funds do change from year to year, and Heartland is aware of that. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious, what's the trajectory that we're looking at in terms of bringing on a position that will pay for itself at some point, and what's the expected timeline for that?
So what I would say is that the psychiatric supplemental has varied over the last couple of years from $800,000. It's currently at $400,000. This request and the supplemental request that will go through the budget process all fit within a flat psychiatric supplemental of $400,000 for 2024 as well. So
Assuming
we
that's
are
where we stay for
assuming
2024.
that's where we would stay for 2024. But in terms of thinking about these allocations, that's how we've been thinking about them and trying to, again, be able to speak to and have thoughtful conversations through the budget process with Bert Nash's needs and with the other needs. That's the box that we've been working.
So I think my
within.
question there is, if this position will eventually pay for itself, what's the time frame for that? Or is it not intended to pay for itself in its entirety? And then what percentage of that will be expected to be covered in other places? I'm not objecting to, I just want to know what the
Sure.
whole scope is.
What we have done in the past is to have agreements with our partners that we would reduce the amount of funding from 50% to 40% to 30% over the course of 3 years. We've had to stay pretty stable when the provider gets to 40% as we've looked at that mix between revenues and expense. So there are no guarantees and there are no commitments. There are no long-term commitments to fund positions at one place or another. It's to provide supplemental funds to offset the loss that any of our providers take when they choose to bring a psychiatrist to town. Does that
That
answer the
does,
question?
that gets me there.
Yeah.
And my other comment was just, I'm excited that we're talking about an identified provider, because when I read through the proposal and I thought, well, that's the easy part, it's the funding. The hard part is finding someone to come to town because there's such a need and there's such a gap in providers. So I'm excited to see that is an identified person who wants to be here.
Okay, let's take some public comment and then we may have some more questions. Is there anybody here who'd like to provide public comment on this item? Come on up.
Gene Dorsey, Lawrence, Kansas. I think the key words in this proposal are child psychiatrist, which is a big need in Douglas County. We're short on adult psychiatrists, but certainly much shorter on child psychiatrists. The other comment I would have is, please remember you have over $15 million in the bank from the quarter-cent mental health sales tax passed in 2018. So if your current budget doesn't include enough funds, I suspect you could tap into the over $15 million in your bank to fund this. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Anyone online? All right, bring it up to commissioners for further discussion, questions or comments or motions. Maybe I'll get us started here. I agree with Mr. Dorsey. We certainly need child psychiatry, and I think it's been a really good plan over the year to try to help recruit psychiatry services to Douglas County. It's really hard. I'm very supportive of this. I just wanted to make sure, and my question to Heartland, that they understood we're not holding ourselves to future budget allocations. And it seems like we need to do this now, I'm sure, to recruit this person and get them here. So any waiting until later budget decisions are made, I think it is not going to help you. So I'm supportive of this. And commissioners, if you have questions or comments, certainly invite them, but I'm happy to make a motion when we're ready.
I would make a motion, or you can. I move that we redirect $121,500 from the 2023 psychiatry supplement to support the addition of a new child psychiatrist at Heartland Community Health Center.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes 3-0. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Thank you, Bob. We'll move on to item 4.2, which is to consider a conditional use permit, CUP 230079, for limited scale solar energy conversion systems at the northeast corner of East 400 Road and North 1700 Road. Why Mary's getting ready and getting her slides pulled up, let me just walk everybody through sort of how we're going to do this. And this is true of every CUP we do. Staff will make a presentation. The applicant will have an opportunity to provide comments if they want to. They don't have to. Then commissioners can ask questions of staff and the applicant. Then we'll open it up for public comment. Then we offer an opportunity for the applicant to respond to any of the public comments if they like. And then we'll turn it over to questions, comments, and motions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mary Miller. Hi, Mary.
Hi, good evening. Mary Miller, planner, and I'll be sharing my screen. I'll get it up real quick here. This is the conditional use permit for a solar scale energy conversion system. It is proposed in the northeast corner of the intersection of North 1700 Road and East 400 Road. It would be for the northwest 12.6 acres of this larger 117 acre parcel in that intersection. This is not within the urban growth area of the city of Lawrence, but it is within the 3-mile planning radius of the city of Lecompton. The city of Lecompton's planning commission was notified of the joint planning commission meeting, and they did not attend the meeting or provide comments. The applicant intends to lease the area that's outlined here, 12.6 acres. So it would remain part of a larger agricultural parcel. Some key points with this application is that it is a limited scale solar energy conversion system in that it's less than 20 acres. And limited scale facilities are exempt from some of the standards in our zoning regulations. They're exempt from the requirement to provide wildlife friendly fencing and to provide groundwater testing. All other standards noted in the zoning regulations apply. No battery storage is being proposed. Electricity generated would be distributed or transmitted to the lines on East 400 Road, and then they would be transmitted south to the Stoll substation that's just to the south. And this would be a partnership between Free State Electric Cooperative and Evergy. The solar facility would be unmanned, therefore there'd be minimal traffic while it's in operation. Maintenance vehicles would park within the site. There is a graveled area that's planned for kind of a staging area for construction, and also this is where anything would park that came to the site. Solar panels would be arranged as shown on this plan. They'd be no more than 15 feet tall and fully extended. And as this is a tilled field, no grading would be required except for the gravel staging area and access drive. The site would be fenced with chain link fence with 3 strands of barbed wire on top for security. And as I mentioned, being a limited scale facility, it's not required to have wildlife friendly fencing. No lighting is being proposed. The only lighting that would be used is if there was emergency maintenance needed in the nighttime hours. If lighting were to be proposed in the future, a lighting plan would need to be provided to the planning office and approved before any lighting could be installed. And this is listed as one of the conditions because nighttime lighting is one of the principal impacts with uses in the rural areas. The applicant provided a construction timeline. They expect construction to last about 6 months and to run from June to December of 2023. They noted that the installation of the H piles would be the loudest part of construction. And I've learned that H piles are steel beams that are square in shape and driven into the ground by pile-driven driving equipment. And like I said, they expect that to last 2 to 3 weeks. A new distribution line would be installed to connect the facility with the distribution lines on the west side of 400 Road. And one of the principal impacts of construction, besides the sound of the pile driving equipment, would be the traffic. The heaviest truck traffic would be during the major delivery period, which would be the first 1 or 2 months of construction. Standard 18-wheeler trucks would be used to haul heavy equipment. And after deliveries, traffic to the site would be pickups, flatbed traffic for the workers and small deliveries. They estimate that about 25 semi-trucks would be needed for deliveries of the heavy equipment and about 30 to 35 dump truck loads of gravel to do the access drive and this laydown area. And they expect that to take about a week. The township noted that the transportation road maintenance plan was acceptable. Evergy would be responsible for repairing any damage done during construction, and vehicles would come to the site from Topeka via Highway 40 and use East 400 Road to access the site. And this is outlined in that transportation plan. And as I mentioned, there'd be very little traffic after construction. The vegetation plan that was provided notes that pollinator seeding mixes would be applied under and near the panels, and native seeding mixes would be applied around the periphery of the site. Herbicides are expected to be necessary for the first few years for the annual and biannual weeds that they'd be expecting. Once the cover crop is established, they wouldn't expect to have to use herbicides any longer. They are looking into the possibility of grazing sheep in the future and have been working with the local sheep grazer to ensure that what they're designing would not conflict with the grazing. The grazer has told them they would use their own temporary fencing so that they could keep sheep away from equipment or wiring that they could damage. So with CUPs, we always review with the golden factors, and one is whether or not it is compatible with zoning and land uses in the nearby area. The nearby area is mostly zoned Ag 1 for agriculture and is used for agriculture. There are some areas of Ag 2 zoning to the west and the east on North 1700 Road, and these contain residences. The proposed use would be compatible with the land uses and zoning in the nearby area, given the low impact passive nature of the solar energy conversion system, the minimal traffic expected with the use, and the standards that have been established to minimize potential negative impacts, primarily the limit on sound level that can be produced at the property lines and the lighting requirements. Another factor we look at is whether or not the use would be compatible with the character of the area. And as usual, we look at about a mile radius of the subject property. And so on this graphic, I attempted to mark all the residences, and this was done using GIS mapping, so I may have missed some, but it's just intended to give us a general idea of where residences are located throughout the area. There are some non-residential uses. As I mentioned, there is the Stoll substation to the south, and to the east, there's a fire district building and a township road maintenance facility. This is primarily an agricultural area with residential development along the periphery and scattered rural residences within the interior of the area. The proposed solar facility would have a low profile with panels being no more than 15 feet tall. This would not be a traffic or noise generator. So given the low impact of the solar facility, it should not impact the character of the area. Other factors that we look at is what is the suitability of the property? The property is well suited for uses permitted in the agricultural district and is currently being used as agriculture. It's also well suited to the proposed use as it has a relatively level grade and does not have features that would conflict with the installation of a solar facility, such as woodland, wetlands, floodway, or stream corridors. We look at what is the impact on the natural environment. Solar panels do not emit pollutants as a rule. However, it is possible that there could be a leaking solar panel. So one of the conditions has to do with extraordinary events. If a solar panel does leak, there's a requirement to remove it quickly. If it's not removed within a certain number of days, then soil testing is required to ensure that there was no damage to the soil and the pollution. Environmentally sensitive lands on the property consist of prime farmland and class 2 soils. These cover the entire property and would be included in the facility. But as noted earlier, there would be no grading or very little grading on the property. And a cover crop of pollinator or native plants would help to minimize erosion and maintain the health and quality of the soil. And due to the use of the cover crop, the drainage plan that was provided indicated that stormwater drainage from the site is expected to be reduced. The facility is not expected to have a negative impact on the natural environment. Due to the nature of the solar facility being a utility use, no impacts to the community facilities or utilities are identified. And as far as the impact on the transportation network, the township trustee accepted the transportation and road maintenance plan. So there are measures to repair the roads if any damage is done. One of the criteria is whether or not a time limit is appropriate. With the standards, a time limit is required for solar facilities, and 25 years is the maximum. And in this case, we are recommending the full 25 years for the time limit. And then we look at whether or not the proposed use is compliant with the standards in the zoning regulations. And that was noted in the appendix with the staff report that it is in compliance with one exception. And that is that there's a requirement that all the electrical lines on site be underground. And in this case, some of them are shown above ground. And the applicant provided a memo at the Planning Commission meeting, noting that one of the lines may be considered a distribution tie-in line. That would tie in from the facility substation to the utility substation. However, in this case, these smaller facilities don't have on-site substations. They have a transformer, and it would operate the same as a tie-in line of a larger facility. And I prepared a staff memo that was in your packet where I outlined some of the applicant's concerns with the conditions. And I erroneously noted that the proposal would meet the exemption because of the fact that the property is made up completely of environmentally sensitive lands, being prime farmland. And there is a provision that underground lines may not be required if it would be detrimental to the environmentally sensitive lands. And we would want to reduce the amount of trenching or grading on the prime farmland. And I made an error in that it's not an exemption, but that is one of the criteria that the county commission could use to approve a modification request. And so I should have recommended in the memo that the county commission approve the modification request rather than labeling it as an exemption. And as we go through the conditions, there were 4 that the applicant requested changes to. If there's any changes made to the conditions, I'll revise the resolution and place it back on a later agenda for adoption. And then we look at compliance with the comprehensive plan. In the natural resource chapter, it recommended that we develop land use regulations and incentives to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And the zoning regulations were just recently revised to add solar energy conversion systems as a use and develop specific standards. And the intent was to allow the use while minimizing negative impacts where appropriate. And action step 6.1 recommends we adopt a climate change adaptation and plan and incorporate potential climate change scenarios and identify actions to reduce greenhouse gases. And while this action step is directly geared toward the built and urban environment, replacing the current coal-fired electric plant in Douglas County with electricity from renewable sources would reduce greenhouse gases emissions countywide. And this would benefit both the rural and the urban environment. And then in chapter 3, growth and development, the recommendations are to minimize agricultural land conversion to other uses and to maintain working lands and high quality agricultural soils for future generations. And with most non-agricultural development, the conversion of ag land to another use is non-reversible. Once the change has been made, it's highly unlikely the land would return to agricultural use. And the standards for the solar energy conversion systems were written with the goal that the facilities would serve as a form of land bank. First, it would prevent land divisions during the life of the facility, and the agricultural land would be maintained for concurrent agricultural use, which is agrivoltaics, and or preserved for future agricultural uses. And so this would comply with these regulations to minimize the conversion and to maintain working lands. The Planning Commission voted unanimously at their April meeting to forward this application to the Board of County Commissioners with a recommendation for approval with possible changes to 4 conditions requested by the applicant. And these were noted in the staff memo. The first condition they asked to be revised would be to extend the time limit beyond the 25 years. And I consulted with the county counselor, and he indicated that our regulations are written so that there is no extension process for that time limit. And so it's not possible for there to be a modification expanding that. So there is no change being proposed to condition number 1 or recommended. Condition number 10, the on-site electrical lines being underground. And as I mentioned earlier, I am recommending the approval of a modification to allow the on-site electrical lines to be above ground, due to the fact that that would preserve the health of the environmentally sensitive lands, the prime farmland on the site. This graphic shows these lines that I've been mentioning. The green line is what would be called the high-end distribution line, which would connect the transformer to the lines connecting to the substation. The red lines they're called CAB. I don't know what that stands for, but they operate the tracking panels. And you can see them here in the bottom picture. And then there's lines connecting them to the transformer. And so this is a picture of the property, and where the prime farmland is, it's the entire property. So that's why I think it'd be appropriate to approve the modification so that we're not requiring this trenching. Condition number 16 is another one they requested revision to. This discusses the reviews. There's a 1-year review and then reviews every 5 years. And these reviews are to ensure that the site is compliant with the standards and conditions of the conditional use permit. The applicant indicated they would like in-house reviews, or if a third party is used, they'd like to have an estimate of the cost. And I spoke with the zoning and codes director, and she indicated they would like to do all the reviews in-house, but you wanted to keep the option for a third party in case their workload was such that they needed it. And I looked, and I was not able to find a way to get a cost estimate as the conditions have not been finalized, but I just don't know a firm that I would be able to get a good estimate from at this time. So I'm recommending this condition. It's a bit of a compromise. It just notes to add to that condition, it would not change the standards for solar energy conversion systems, but it would apply to this. And it may be something we want to apply to all small scale facilities, that if a third party review is utilized and the and the selected firm or the cost of the review is unacceptable to the operator may submit a request to the Board of County Commissioners for an alternate third party or an in-house review. And so that's just a suggestion. And the last condition that the applicant requested was about the bond. In the regulations, we require a bond, cash escrow, or other financial security. And the applicant asked if Evergy's corporate guarantee could be used as a financial security. And so I consulted with our county counselor, and she indicated there was no reason that would not be legal, that it would be at the county commission's discretion if they wanted to use that. So I don't have a recommendation on that. I don't know enough about corporate guarantees and financial securities to provide a recommendation, but I think the applicant is here tonight and would have more information on that. So these are the general conditions. I was going to go over them, but they were all listed in the regulations. So if you have any questions on those, I'll be happy to answer your questions. And as I mentioned, the applicant is, I believe they're attending the meeting in person today.
Thank you, Mary. Commissioners, do you have any questions of Mary at this point? No. Okay. And we'll invite the applicant if they have any comments they'd like to make.
Mr. Chair, before we go any further, I do have to have some ex parte communication that I let you know about, I did have a phone call with Damon Ray from Evergy and Mr. Carr from Free State. Many of the same questions I asked on that phone call, I'm going to ask again tonight. So I think all of that will be available for the public.
Good evening. Can you guys hear me okay? My name is Jill Taggart. I am with Free State Electric Cooperative. Free State is a member-owned cooperative, and we are very excited to be partnering with Evergy to bring clean energy to our member owners in Douglas County. The small-scale solar site is located behind the meter, which means the clean energy will stay local and serve the 1,362 meters served by our Stoll substation. While the energy will serve the members in Douglas County, the savings will be spread across the entire membership. Annually, we'll save about $170,000 per megawatt in today's dollars. It's an offset to our power cost, and those savings are passed directly to our members. We're looking to install a 1.25 megawatt site on approximately 13 acres in Douglas County, and this will be our 5th and final site. We currently have 1 site in Leavenworth, 1 in Jefferson, and 2 in Shawnee County. And with our 5th and final site, this will bring our total solar generation to a little over 5.5 megawatts. On behalf of Free State and our membership, I want to thank you for considering our project.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Chris Carey. Sorry about that. Good evening. My name is Chris Carey. I'm with PPB Enviro Solutions. We're an environmental consulting firm based in Topeka. I'm here today working for Evergy and Free State to help explain our project and provide some of the rationale and justification for why we want to do what we want to do here. I think Jill explained very well. One of the exciting things about this project specifically is this is a distribution scale solar project. This is local energy serving local customers. So I think that's one of the big elements that we want to highlight with this particular project is the local nature of it. I do have a PowerPoint. Let me see if I can pull this up. We will just make this work.
Eric, do you want to help him real quick?
Thank you. So Mary did a really nice job, honestly, explaining our project. There's a lot of information in here. I'm not going to go through everything because it's going to be really repetitive. I will highlight a few key elements. Again, like Mary mentioned and like Jill mentioned, this is a cooperative effort between Evergy and Free State. The project is located just north of Free State's Stoll substation off of East 400 Road. Mary explained the construction process. I think that's all pretty straightforward. This is a map showing where our project's located. We're located about 5 miles west of Lawrence and about 3.5 miles south of Lecompton. Again, this is the site plan. And one of the things that wasn't mentioned is that this is a racking detail. This shows how the panels are designed and how they track with the sun, which is part of why we need that cab system that Mary was talking about. This is the electrical panel, the control panel for the facility. This is located on the north side of the project. So this is going to be where all the controls are. And this is a photo of what we're dealing with. One of the things that's important to note here is that we are going to preserve the tree line that's on the east side of 400 Road. And then one of the things that we've done here recently is really dug into the vegetation. Evergy has a longstanding vegetation management consultant that they use. They're very well known, very well respected. In addition, over the last few weeks, last few days, few weeks, we've reached out to the Kansas Biological Survey and gotten their take to make sure that we can develop a seed mix that really maximizes the pollinator habitat and is grazing friendly. Evergy's consulted with local grazers about this project, like Mary mentioned. That's not something that we're going to pursue at this point, but it's something that will be an option down the road if that's something that we want to pursue in the future. And then again, in terms of herbicide use, we will need to use herbicides from time to time. Those are going to be spot applied by a licensed professional who's certified to do that type of work. It's not going to be wholesale spread across the entire facility or anything like that. Mary covered the golden factors really well. I don't really think I have anything to change or suggest here. This is pictures of another comparable solar farm that's in Baldwin City. You can see here the pollinator mix that we have looks really great, actually. And then Mary covered a few conditions, a few changes that we wanted to talk about. And I want to first say I appreciate planning staff's responsiveness. They did a really nice job of talking through these issues, looking into what they can do for us, what they can't do in terms of things like the duration of the CUP, and even coming up with solutions for how we might be able to make this project work a little bit longer. But in addition, we do appreciate Mary going back and looking at some of these items. So we're in concurrence with planning commission or the planning staff's recommendation related to the underground versus above ground wiring, having those be above ground for both the generator tie line as well as the cab system. Again, here's another photo of the cab system. This is going to run down the middle of the panels, and then it would go underground. You can see there with that PVC pipe, it would go underground where it ties into the control panel on the north side. And then again, one of the requests that we made is, given the relatively small scale of this project, the costs associated with providing a bond for the decommissioning is extensive. So one of the things that I deal with regularly in the environmental sector is using a corporate guarantee to make sure that a company has the ability to pay for future obligations that they may have, maybe related to a landfill or something like that. So the same concept I think applies here. We're dealing with two very large utility companies that have numerous customers in our area. Evergy is certainly going to be able to cover whatever decommissioning costs may be encountered 25 years from now when we're looking at moving beyond this project. Free State likewise has thousands of customers in our area, and both companies will have the financial wherewithal and viability to be able to cover those costs. So that's why we think it makes sense for Evergy to be allowed to use a corporate guarantee at this point. Down the road, obviously, if the ownership of this solar project changes, whoever takes up that on is going to have to be able to show that same level of financial viability to make sure that they can also cover those future costs when they come up. And that's all I have for you guys. Do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions. Commissioners, any questions for the applicant?
I will have quite a few, Mr. Chair. Do you want them now or do you want them after public comment?
It's up to you.
I'll start with the spot spray.
Yeah.
And you showed a slide and that's a little bit different from the language that Mary used.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit more like what the intended use of herbicides might be? What's the goal for the vegetation planting there beyond, pollinator? I mean, how would you plan to manage that?
So the overall goal of the herbicides would be to prevent any type of invasive species that may come up. Obviously, that's going to be our biggest issue, and that's where we would use that.
Do we have anything in writing in terms of that vegetation plan?
We do have some detail that was provided as part of the application. I don't have that handy with me, but that was part of the application.
Might ask Mary, is that something that we can pull up as part of the application? And I can give you a minute to work on that if possible.
I don't remember if it was included with the application itself in the agenda packet. Yeah, if you want to keep talking, I'll see if I can go pull that up and get it on my screen here. I can do that.
Commissioner Willie, can I jump in for you? I have something highlighted on page 94 of the agenda packet, which is part of the Stan Tech part of the memo with vegetation plan. I think there were a few places that talked about it, but there was some specific paragraphs that went into a little bit more detail in that. And to piggyback off of your question about management, well, it's a two-part question in this paragraph I have highlighted. It mentions that the seed mix will be installed via drilling if possible. And so I just want to clarify what that means versus broadcast seeding or hand broadcast seeding. And then it also towards the end of it talks about that you'll assume that 100% of the project site will be planted in the approved mix to begin restoration, but 25% will be maintained in perpetuity beneath the panels. Commissioner Willie, I don't know if that it seems similar to part of your question. I just want to understand what do you mean by the 25% managed in perpetuity underneath the panels, and how does that compare to the other 75% of the project site that has a native or pollinator seed mix?
Perfect. I'm going to get Damon Ray with Evergy to join me.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, Damon Ray with Evergy in Lawrence, Kansas. So the 25% represents the total area, approximately the total area that is covered by the panels from a top-down view. And so that's the amount of area that has less sun and is shaded most of the time. So there's a specific seed mix for that portion, whereas the rest of the sites that receives normal sun will have the pollinator and native grass mix.
And are there differences in how you will manage those two different types of, for mowing or?
No,
Okay.
they'll be managed the same way.
Thanks for letting me jump in, Commissioner Lee.
Thank you very much. So in terms of woody vegetation control, because presumably you don't want anything shading these panels. So what's the plan for that?
Woody vegetation would either be spot sprayed with herbicide or manually pulled and removed.
You mentioned that you've had some conversations with grazers and that is not the plan for the moment, but a plan for the future. Are you developing that plan now in terms of like whether or not it's not called bus bars, what's it called? The cab system, whether that works in terms of moving fencing around? Have you had those conversations?
We have. Our initial conversations have indicated that grazers would typically have their own electric fence that they could put up around that cab system to prevent the animals from interacting with them. So,
What about water?
so water for this small of a site, water would be trucked in if we were to pursue grazing.
And that would be something that Free State Evergy would provide or that the grazer would
It would
provide?
have to be worked out in the future with whatever local grazer we would work with.
And I know I'm digging into this and I have lots of other topics, so I don't want to go too far, but in terms of the grazing expectation, is it expected that you'd be hiring someone as a vegetation manager who would graze it and also manage woody vegetation and maybe be in charge of the spot spraying or whatever that would be, and they would be paid for that? Or is this something where they would pay to rent the land for grazing?
We have not gone to that level of detail.
I think in much of the agrivoltaics, like in the Northeast, it's that they're paid to manage the vegetation. They happen to use animals for it, as opposed to kind of it's an interesting kind of juxtaposition of the economics around grazing. And that's one of the things that I'm very curious to see if solar can play that role in terms of it's not just that we have land that is available for grazing, it's that it's helping to kind of boost some economics around farming too. You mentioned that Kansas Biological Survey had recently been kind of engaged. Was that just a conversation or two, or is there an expectation that we would have someone who is local and knows of our local pollinators and species that would be involved with the project?
Yeah, so we have engaged them and the response is that they're willing to come take a look at the site and are projected vegetation plan with the seed mixes. And the local expert that knows the area and what works here is who would be doing that.
Would that be just to choose the seed mix, or would that be a long-term relationship like a contract?
It would be just a review of the vegetation management plan and seed mix that Stantec is putting together for us. So they would have an opportunity to review the seed mix and the plan of how it would be mowed, or how the herbicides would be used, and so on and so forth.
So who then would be responsible for the long-term decisions around vegetation management?
Currently, we've contracted with Stantec to perform those services.
Stantec is the name?
Yeah.
And who are they and where are they from, and how often would they be on site?
They are a restoration contractor who has experience with vegetation management at solar farms. They have provided the vegetation services at all of our other facilities, including the ones that you saw in the picture during the slideshow. And so they would be on site as needed, but likely in the spring and fall to seed, and then a couple times throughout the growing season. Most likely 3 or 4 times in the first couple of years, and then reducing to 1 or 2 times once that native vegetation is established.
I don't know if you follow the local news, but not all vegetation managers are the same. I think it's something that we're learning through the city of Lawrence. And so what I'm looking at is, will we have eyes on this mix for the long term that are kind of shared community goals, and not just a question of this is what we do under solar panels because it's easy and then we walk away.
Understood. Yep. Yeah. Like I said, we work with Stantec, and we trust them on our other sites, and the vegetation management there has been excellent so far.
Would you consider a contract with a local vegetation manager?
That is possible. Yeah.
Going to stop on that particular topic for now. Chair, do you want me to take others, or would you like to move on? Okay. So the fencing is not required for the smaller installations to have wildlife friendly fencing. I know most solar installations prefer to have kind of the full security fencing. It's not a huge area, but I'm just curious, like what goes into that decision other than kind of the status quo? Is there a reason why it couldn't be wildlife friendly fencing?
At this site, no, there's no reason it couldn't be wildlife friendly. It does have to maintain, I believe, a 7-foot height, including, the barbed wire. So what we propose is 6 foot of chain link with a foot of barbed wire for security reasons. Obviously, wildlife friendly might be a little bit easier to get through, but so that's why we propose the chain link.
Okay, I think we're creating a habitat that is preferential to some wildlife species. Being able to come and go from that space might be important. And we're thinking turtles and ground nesting birds that are low flying, that kind of thing. So I might ask some more. I might come back to that. So I know that the H piles, we're expecting to just drive those into the ground and then pull them out again with no concrete. But the fencing, like a traditional barbed wire fence, typically isn't concreted in, or at least most of it isn't. But usually a chain link fence is. So is that expected that would be concreted in?
I am not sure on the fencing plan. I believe there are at least the corner posts are concrete and the gate posts are concrete. But I would have to double check the rest of the posts along the run. If
Okay.
they're
Trying to get a feel for
different
kind
or
of
not.
impact on the land from a variety of aspects. So you've mentioned in both Mary's presentation and yours that there won't be grading on the site, which is very important to me. So I appreciate that a lot. I know this is a reasonably small and reasonably flat site, but in terms of the terraces, there's no issues for you with working around them as they are?
No, we've worked around the terraces at our Shawnee sites and just fine. We can build the racking system right over the top of them.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Don't forget to stay close to that microphone.
In terms of soil testing, I know there's some kind of minimum requirements in the regs. Do you have a soil testing plan? And if it's in here, I can scroll to that.
We do have it. We do have a detailed soil testing plan.
Is it part of the application?
It is.
Okay, then I'll have to find it. I can yield for other questions while I look at that, or if you want to kind of give me kind of an overview of what you expect to test for and.
We're testing for everything that's spelled out specifically in the solar regulations. We've situated our testing area to be immediately down gradient of where the solar panels are, so that any type of environmental impact which may have been resulting from those solar panels are is addressed and picked up in through the soil testing. In terms of specific analytes, I need to look at the plan to
No,
remember.
that's-
It's been several months.
No, that's okay. And I understand what was asked for. So it's a single location, I think, is all that's required because we kind of had larger installations in mind when we were thinking of this. I think it was one per paddock or whatever we called it.
I think if I recall right, it is a composite sample from several individual locations within a testing area specifically.
And the soil health type testing that was through Ward Labs, I think I read through here, is that?
Correct.
Oh, one more. Trying to cover everything that we may have talked over on the phone and make sure that I come back to that, as well as, of course, as you noticed, plenty of others. Have you had a chance to talk with local first responders and fire departments for what a training plan might need to look like?
And I mentioned, I've intended to bring that up in my presentation, but I didn't. That's something that Evergy has reached out to. We've reached out to the local emergency responders. We have not had a chance to meet with them yet, but we have plans to do that and to make sure that we provide them what they need.
Which departments did you reach out to?
I'm not sure which department it is, but Chief Baxter is who we've reached out to and scheduled a site visit for the end of this month.
It seems like one of the issues that came up at the Planning Commission that I didn't see this time around was that to have that fire training plan in place. And I think there was a request at planning that you have some time to work that out, what that might be, because I think we were asking for annual training that may be more than necessary. But I think it's important that it be offered. We do have one in Baldwin, which I don't think we're necessarily training on the way we should, but it's a kind of a learning experience for the county. And so I think it's important to me anyway to see that training is proactively offered, even if the departments say, we don't need it this year. We have a lot of turnover and a lot of volunteers that can't always make it to a training. So I recognize that it's much like any other grass fire, except that we are probably not going to come in your installation and we'll just fight it from the outside. But that is something I'd like to see a commitment to.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have for our Shawnee sites, we have scheduled training with those departments and created an emergency action plan for those sites. And we'll be going over training with those departments over the coming months. Those two sites just went into service earlier this year. So having that initial training session soon. And then I believe we included a draft emergency management plan in the application here. So.
The last one on this current list is about the bond, and that may be more a question between commissioners. So I think I'll hold on that one for now, but thank you very much.
Any other further questions before public comment? Okay, thank you. We'll open this up for public comment. If you'd like to provide public comment, I don't have the sheet, Jill. Yeah. Just one. Okay. And then I've got Marcia as well.
I think that's my name on there.
Yeah, that's fine. Just leave it there.
Am I
Just leave it
okay
there.
now?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to, I'm just kind of wrapping my head around this. So in order to fight climate change, we are going to go to China, which is the biggest polluter in the world by far, and buy solar panels from them, have them shipped on container ships, and then shipped to here. That's going to help the climate. You know who it helps? Helps China. And also, we're going to put it on agricultural land. Chairman Xi couldn't have written this up any better. If you like China, then go ahead with it. Go ahead with it. And speaking of climate change, I heard some comments about major catastrophes, climate weather patterns. Somebody tell me how many tornadoes, how many floods, how many events are going to be prevented by this? You got to measure it. There's no measurement, and that's why you use that. What's the current CO2 levels? What's the goal? How is this going to help us get there? Somebody got an answer? I'd like to know. So China gets richer. We have less land for food. And how's that help the environment?
Thanks, Dan.
Hello, my name is Margaret Kumar, and commissioners, I want to thank you for all you do. But I would like to respectfully remind you that you do represent the interest of all the members, all the residents of Douglas County. And overwhelmingly, the residents of Douglas County support transitioning away from fossil fuels into renewables, and in some cases, large scales renewables. I base this opinion on the fact that the Sierra Club is currently passing around a petition trying to urge Evergy to live up to their promise of closing down the coal plant in 2024. And when we have approached people, strangers, friends, neighbors, almost overwhelmingly, with very few exceptions, the reaction of people is, of course we want to transition away from fossil fuels. Of course we don't want to burn up with global warming. Of course we prefer renewables over oil, gas, and coal. And then as for the argument about agricultural land, I would remind you that everything is a subset of global warming. And if global warming gets so bad that we have extensive droughts, water shortages, there will be no meaningful agriculture. Thank you.
Any other public comment?
Good evening. I'm Tad Kramar. I live near Big Springs, which isn't too far from this proposed project. I am thrilled that our local utility, Free State, is proposing this solar project and will include pollinator-friendly plants. Please take all reasonable measures to allow wind and solar energy in Douglas County at all levels, from rooftop to limited to utility scale. A large utility scale solar project could produce as much electricity as some 20,000 rooftop units. We have solar panels, but we cannot possibly reduce global warming enough without all levels of wind and solar, including limited and utility scale. So please do what is needed to leave a livable planet for our children and grandchildren. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Marcia Pohl. And first I want to say that I'm not opposed to this 12-acre energy, solar energy that they're wanting to put in, because all of that stays within the local area. It's not being shipped off to Timbuktu, the Southwest Power Pool or the Southeast Power Pool. However, I am against industrial wind and solar that takes the energy it produces to other parts of our country. I am opposed to using prime farmland and industrial solar when we have other options. Here are a few examples. Baldwin City has a small solar field that helps with electricity for that city. There are also solar panels on the Mid-America Bank in Baldwin. The Mercantile here in Lawrence has solar panels in the parking lots. Other cities throughout our country have solar panels on businesses and parking lots. Utilizing space for businesses and utilities just makes sense. And also, you know, underneath those solar panels where people are parking their cars when they're in Walmart for 2 hours, they could also even plug in maybe to something. I mean, utilize that time because it takes several hours to, if your battery goes down on your car, I've heard it's up to at least 4 hours. Who sits at a gas station for 4 hours? You know, think outside the box. If they had plug-ins underneath these solar panels, you could be plugging, you could be regenerating your generator while you're getting groceries. Then there are also places in our county and our city that are contaminated and not fit for human food or playgrounds. These areas need to be used instead of stripping our county of valuable farmland, like farmland industries. I understand it is a city-owned. However, the county and city need to work together to utilize these things. Douglas County is not the only place solar and wind can be put. If each county and each state would take care of their own needs, we would not have to need these big industrial solar and wind here. Prime farmland and wildlife and its habitat would not be destroyed. Remember, the average wind speed for the turbines needs to be 25 miles an hour. And in Douglas County, our average is only 17 miles an hour, which is poor to marginal. So in order for them to stay at 25 miles an hour, they have to use petroleum-based fuel to keep the generators, to keep them going and all. So we are the fifth smallest.
Time's up.
The fifth smallest and the fifth most populated in the state.
Any other public comment on this item?
Good evening. I'm Michael Allman. Excuse me. Michael Allman. I'm with Sustainability Action Network. We support this project, this permit application for Free State Solar. And it's very noteworthy and very encouraging that the first permit application for Douglas County for a solar project is a community solar project. When staff and the Planning Commission developed the regulations, they termed it limited scale, which in a sense reflects what it is, but more accurately, it's a matter of how the project itself is both functionally structured as well as operationally structured. Community solar, as opposed to corporate industrial solar, is local democratic solar. It is operationally brought forward by the community, for the community, paid for, financed by locally, organized and operated locally, owned locally, in this case, by a rural electric co-op. But community solar could be brought forward by any kind of a local entity like a water district, a school district, fire stations, townships, any kind of local entity, including not-for-profits, set up for that very purpose. Then functionally, as the previous speaker also mentioned, the electricity is generated locally and used locally. It's what's termed a microgrid. The electricity here is going exclusively to the members of the co-op. If there is excess electricity, the microgrid is tied to the Southwest Power Pool grid so that that would then feed over to the larger grid and they would get a credit for that. So it's really the best of both worlds. But to me, the main value of this is that it is locally controlled. The local people decide when and where and how they want to do their solar rather than, thank you, a multinational corporation coming in, setting the terms, telling the community what they're going to do, and only after the fact does the community get to then maybe respond in public hearings. So this is something that I think should be a model for the county. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Janet Yaley, rural Douglas County. And I was just wondering if this 12 acres could eventually become hundreds of acres of solar, or if that has been addressed, or if you have questioned that. I don't know if that has come up or not. And I'm also very glad that you're concerned about the ag land. Thank you.
Hi, Catherine Ellsworth, Eudora, Kansas. I'm just going to read. I'm better at that. I was giddy when I read the permitting documentation for the Stoll Solar facility, which is a rare occurrence. I was very happy. I appreciate that that it's a sensible scale. They're not generating excess energy that would require additional infrastructure for exportation. I appreciate that it's used locally and that they put a lot of consideration into the siting, that it's on previously disturbed land, cultivated, with a minimum grading necessary. And above all, I appreciate, the consideration and open communication about the ancillary infrastructure, the existing substation, the expansion that was previously approved. And I'm also happy that it's going to be affiliated with Evergy, because in Kansas, only publicly held utilities are provided oversight. And it's just weird. Public oversight by KCC, and privately held utilities do not. So, such as Evergy. In keeping with the, I also appreciate the fact that the applicant engaged with the Kansas Biological Survey. They've given substantial consideration for the buffering vegetation and have enumerated the fulfillment of the assorted golden criteria. The one detail that gives me pause is the 60 decibels at the property line. And then there's a clause or neighboring residents. 60 decibels is pretty loud. So, and also when you go by to the residents, then you're impinging on what any owner can do in the future with that property. So I think that the 60 decibels, although that's loud, should be at the property line of the leasing landowner or facility. Also, in the documentation, I think it would be better if we stopped referring to the Baldwin City Municipal installation. It's only 4 acres and it's really not an appropriate representation of some of these larger installations. So we just, we diminish the discourse when we don't have accurate information, which includes graphics and photos. So thank you.
Any other public comment? Any comment online, Sarah? Okay, we'll bring it back up to the commission. Before we do, we'll give the applicant an opportunity. You don't have to, but if you do want to respond to any of the public comments, you're welcome to.
In terms of the question about noise levels, Evergy and Free State don't have any problem with the 60 decibel limit at the property line. We don't see that as being an issue whatsoever. In terms of the ability to expand this project to, hundreds of acres, this project is designed to meet the needs of Free State's customers in this area. This is not something where it can really be effectively amplified in scale and push power back out to the Southwest Power Pool. It's not something that's just not what the intent of this project is. Moreover, if something like that was ever proposed, it would all have to come back to you guys for review and approval again. So we don't, that's not our plan. That's not even possible given the equipment that we're looking at. And if we needed to, or if that was proposed, if someone wanted to do something similar to what was described, it would have to go through planning and come before you guys again with the opportunity for public comment.
Thank you. Okay, commissioners, any more questions? Are we ready for discussion? Commissioner Willie, Commissioner Reed.
I think I just have a question for staff, actually, and maybe Mary, you've got an answer, but maybe Sarah, you're the better person to ask. We need to have a conversation about the bond piece of it. So can we hear a little bit about other examples of, and also differences between a bond versus corporate security? Do we have other sort of CUP projects that we could just reference for a bit of comparison that have corporate security instead of a bond?
Mary, I'm not familiar of any projects where we have a corporate security as opposed to a bond, but you may have a better knowledge of that than I do.
I don't believe we do. Most of the CUPs we have that require bonds are quarries and sand pits, and I believe we've always required the bond. I know Ham with their quarry, their Eudora quarry, they suggested using their overall bonding amount, but it was still a bond. It wasn't a corporate guarantee, so I don't have any experience with those.
Okay, that helps. Thanks.
Yeah, maybe we get the discussion going around some of these questions, some of these conditions that they have issues to, and they've asked for different considerations. My feeling on the bond is that's what we wrote in the regulations. I'm going to lean heavily into these regulations because so much good time was spent. There was a lot of time spent here on those regulations. I appreciate the, corporate certificate, but that's not something we're used to. We're very used to doing these bonds. And I'm sure that Evergy has the resources to secure the bond that we require in the regulations. So that's where I'm leaning right now.
I don't think we have enough information about or expertise in the room really to talk about anything besides a bond. I don't see any real compelling need to veer away from that. The main concern is that whatever installation is there, that the money is set aside for decommissioning that to the standard that we have if we didn't have, if the company were not able to perform that at any given time. So I think that's something that the community asks for and looks for quite a bit. And I would not want to set a precedent of kind of diluting that request at this stage of the game. So that's kind of where I'm coming from too.
Commissioners, may I respond to that?
Go ahead.
One of the things that your regulations very clearly says is that it can be a bond or some other mechanism that is approved. What I would like to do is take the opportunity and leave some flexibility in the language of the CUP conditions to allow us to continue to work with and engage with your folks who can perhaps help us come up with something that's more feasible. Again, we understand the idea of a bond for a much larger project. But this is a very small project and the cost for a bond is going to be considerable given the overall cost of this project.
I would kind of turn to Sarah, say, I don't mind offering the flexibility. The question is, would we have to authorize that conversation to happen and then table this and bring it back once we had that agreement? Or can we give you enough structure that you could get us a good agreement that were something other than a bond?
I don't know. Just never a wrong answer, I guess.
Well, so let me say this. I mean, I appreciate your request and I appreciate that's what's in the regulation. You're also our first. I think you've highlighted something that staff needs to look at and be more clear on what that is and be able to, if a corporate certificate is something that we will look at in the future. We said when we put these regulations into place that there were going to be pinch points that we were going to figure out as we go. This may be unfortunately, in my mind, a casualty of being the first one. And that I understand there's an extra cost. And if that means you can't do the project, but I'm going to guess you're still going to do the project if we say there needs to be a bond. That's just a guess. Because I certainly don't think planning staff has any more information on that. And Sarah just said Douglas County staff doesn't have any information on that. You've offered something that we're not familiar with at all. And I just don't feel confident accepting that without some guidance from planning staff or from our staff on that.
Yeah, this Commissioner Reed, I feel the exact same way. And for me to understand clearly, because I couldn't recollect in my time so far, any CUPs where we discussed anything besides a bond around decommissioning. And to Commissioner Kelly's point, this is the first application and these regulations were written with a lot of intention, and that feels like a pretty important piece of it. So I do understand the request for a variation, but the fact that we don't have other examples of that, I don't think this is a good space for us to start setting that precedent. Especially without more clear options and information that we can compare and contrast what the differences of that security, those different types of securities might look like. So I feel pretty strongly that the bond is a condition that we need to stick to per the regulation.
I would ask, so this wasn't something that came up in discussion at the planning commission meeting. Did this get flagged kind of later than that? I know there's been a conversation, I guess, with county councilor about that there may be some other options, but you're not actually bringing up a specific plan at this point, are you?
I believe we brought it up at the planning commission meeting, the request, and then they deferred it to this meeting. And so understood what you guys are saying, appreciate your feedback there. Curious on how the bond amount would be set. Would that be based on the third-party review, or what would be the process there?
I think we turn to staff for that. Mary, how is the bond amount set?
See how it says it will be set with an independent third party. They'll look at the estimated decommissioning and reclamation costs, and that will be at the applicant's expense. It has to be posted before the use begins, and it will have that mechanism for adjustment. So if prices go up or down, it could be adjusted. And the time frame, it has a various time frames for when that would be adjusted. So it would be a third party that would do the estimating of what it would cost to reclaim or decommission. And more than likely, we would reach out to firms that have done that on other small solar facilities.
Mary, can I ask you to clarify? That's pretty standard for how we do quarries and other kind of larger land use issues for that remediation process. Is that right?
That's right. I think this language is taken straight from the quarry bonds. They're very similar to that.
Thank you.
Commissioners, do we want to talk about the other conditions they've asked about? One is the third-party review. And let's be clear, Mary, can you be clear on that one to us? Is that the same third party that sets the bond, or is that a different third party?
That would, it could be the same. We don't have any firms identified. It would more than likely be a consulting firm that, because what they would be doing is reviewing the project to see does it comply with all the standards. So has grading occurred, have soil tests been done? And then they would provide a report after every review, just are they in compliance with standards? And if not, they'd let zoning and codes know so they could either work with them or bring it back before you. So I think it would likely be a different party. We wouldn't need to have the engineering information about how to reclaim or decommission, but we would need to have someone who could look at the regulations and see if what's on the ground is complying. So it could be, but it just wouldn't necessarily have to be.
And I'd add on to that too, that from a staff perspective, given the number of solar facilities that might be coming to Douglas County, I really feel pretty strongly from a staff perspective that we have the flexibility to secure a third party if needed. And I am concerned about the burden of this on existing staff.
Yeah, I'm there too. I mean, this is a third-party review. I understand about the cost of the review is unacceptable to the operator, but I think that is just the cost that you're going to take on. I'm not comfortable with an in-house review. I think this is too early. We have a lot of nervous community members that solar companies won't be following these regulations. And I think we owe it to those community members to make sure we have a third party independent review.
So Commissioner, can I ask for a clarification? So I believe the regs do not require that it be a third party. It gives our staff the option. And so for a smaller installation like this, zoning codes may totally feel like they can manage it. I like them having the flexibility.
Yeah, if they can manage it, that's fine. But I guess what I was saying was this says alternate third party or an in-house review. I'm not interested in an in-house review. Well, I guess I read in-house review as being by the applicant, and I'm not interested
No,
in
sorry, that would be our in-house. review,
yes, okay,
county's
thank you
in-house.
for
Is that
clarifying.
correct, Mary? I don't want to misspeak.
Yes, yeah, staff review, yeah.
So I was actually comfortable with the language that was being proposed for condition 16. Just to make sure that, our zoning and codes office could handle it if they wanted to. I don't mind if the applicant wants to protest and come back through this lovely process. I imagine you wouldn't. I imagine it would probably be worked out long before that, but I'm fine either way, commissioners.
Yeah, I appreciate the language of that, the third party review that gives some flexibility and allows our staff to make an assessment for themselves. Make a recommendation accordingly, and then allow the applicant to make further requests if they want to. That seems reasonable to me.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement. I think I got confused on some language. Apologize for that. Condition number 1, a time limit of 25 years, and we're set on that. We've already, Mary's given us information on that. The on-site electrical lines, this request is to have some above ground. Thoughts on that, commissioners?
I'm not sure what they're asking for is that different from what was kind of the intent of the regulations. And truly in our heads, we had these larger installations in mind that would have a variety of kind of interconnecting pieces. What I keep calling a bus bar in my head, but it's not, it's called something else, the cab system. Got it. That being above ground, I think in my mind is acceptable. I actually would probably rather that than a great big trench to cover all that when we've gone so far as to not have grading on the site. And the idea is that we're building soil organic matter with having perennial vegetation and doing the soil testing and soil health testing to make sure that that is actually happening and to give us some feedback and knowledge as a community for what these installations, what these impacts are. So I would be fine with leaving that above ground. And I think everything else was kind of interconnection to the transmission lines, which was already allowed. So I'm comfortable.
Ditto.
I'm fine too. Okay, so that takes care of the conditions that they've asked for some changes on. What other things do we want to talk about?
I just want to, I suppose, make some comments about vegetation management and agrivoltaics. First of all, just be a little bit of a geek and say that my favorite part of this packet was reading the seed list, native plants that y'all are considering, and really appreciate knowing that you're specifically talking to biological survey and local folks to get that expertise. So very happy about that plan and want to encourage, well, two things. One, I highlighted a section in the report from Stan Tech about the potential for haying in lieu of mowing. And that's something to be worked out between Stan Tech and Evergy and whatnot in the future to figure out that final mix. But for whatever it's worth, this commissioner really supports the idea of exploring the feasibility of haying and then also grazing in the future. So, but because I'm just such a big proponent of like maximize the use of the land and the highest and best possible use of the land, and getting native plants back into the soil is a huge first step. And I think that is very likely, if done right, to improve the soil over the 25-year lifetime. But I think you can still go further. And so I just want to encourage that as time goes on and you learn more about the potential for grazing, that's considered, and that haying is strongly considered as an alternative to mowing if possible. Again, it's that really maximizing the use of what's on that ground. And so I know that there's some details to consider in that in terms of what types of planting there is, but hope that that's something that y'all keep talking about and don't just stop at the planting of native pollinator plants, because I think there's a lot more you can do that, like I said, just really maximizes. And, to Commissioner Willie's comments earlier, really gets us into the space of talking about how we are also maximizing economic opportunity and feasibility for local small businesses and agricultural producers. And so to not, to take that land out of agricultural production temporarily, currently, for harnessing the resource of solar, I think there's some opportunity for both and in time, even if you're not going to start right out the gate with that. And appreciate that you're going to get the soil back, to an even healthier place than it is now first. So those are just my comments about that, and want to encourage that. I hope we'll hear more about it in the future. And I just also want to echo and reiterate a few sort of themes of comments we heard during general public comment, and agree that I'm excited that this is our first project application that we're seeing, that it is an example of what community solar on a smaller scale can look like and how to really maximize that. So I think it was a fun project application to read. I think y'all were quite thorough and had good integrity about really honoring our regulations and making a plan that I think Douglas County can be proud of as a first application. So that's personally where I'm at, and think that it's an encouraging, layer of the conversation that we're having as a community right now about how we start to look at our energy production differently, and land use and potential co-use of land in order to reduce harm and maximize opportunity.
So I'm not against haying as a use here, as long as I do not have to run that baler between your panels. But the difference between haying and grazing, I was kind of looking towards the idea here is that we're also building soil carbon on that ground while it is producing solar electricity. haying takes that carbon and transports it away, whereas grazing recycles that carbon and puts it back in a usable form for plants and other soil life. So I definitely am far more in favor of grazing for kind of these locations where we're kind of tasked with, these are some of the best soils in our community, some of the best soils in the world. We're taking it from a disturbed environment where there are currently no plants on it at all and putting it back to perennial vegetation, which is a huge gain. But grasslands don't actually function on their own. They have to have disturbance. So that's either a grazer or mowing also works for that. But that's how that carbon gets cycled back into the system. So just if our goal with co-use here is to improve that land, if at all possible, I think the grazing would be by far my first choice. Mowing, another possibility, haying a little bit less on it. It's a product that I use. It's a use that I do on some of my own land, but that's always in my head is where's that carbon going? And it's usually going to a concentrated area where we, feed in the winter that is, less biologically diverse and so on. So I just make that distinction. I would love to see grazing happen on this land at some point. I don't know if we codify that and say at the 5-year review, we want to see what you're managing with that. We want to push you. And I think you probably noticed in our regulations that they do. But we want to see not just, this is the status quo, this is what's known in the Midwest. In the Northeast, grazing under soil panels and other kinds of food production is really the norm. And it's much less so here. So even the agrivoltaics conferences show a real weak spot in the middle of the country. And yet we're pretty good at growing food here. We have a lot of people who know how. How do we partner with them? In this case, we're looking at perennial vegetation, which is fabulous. There are also ways to grow specialty crops in and around, and that's going to take some new partnerships and some new kind of research and trial and error. I hope to see that on some other applications, perhaps in the future. But for the most part, I want to see what's next. And I think one of the things I am going to probably ask for is a local vegetation management contract of some kind, or a local vegetation consultant, I should probably say, that we know that someone within our community that understands these goals. I would like to have seen that in the vegetation plan, that carbon sequestration and soil health is part of that goal. It's a little bit implied, but I think if we had somebody, one of our local experts that had eyes on this, we might also start thinking creatively about how else do we do this better on the next project and the next project. So that's something that I'm interested in asking for. If other commissioners are kind of on board, I'd like to get a response and see if that's something you think is doable, or if we would need to defer this and come back with that. But I would rather see kind of what you're able to do.
I would like to clarify the ask, I think. I don't think having a local vegetation management consultant is an issue. However, the people doing the work it is currently Stantec is who we would work with. So I guess I would clarify, what is the scope of your ask, and what would that consultant be responsible for?
Sure. You'd mentioned about being comfortable having a consultant for the initial seed mix and maybe kind of that first as it's getting established. But I'm thinking of someone that's has your ear, has access to come back there. If there are other questions or if there are research opportunities, they can come and ask. It's not that I'm writing that in at this point, but not necessarily that they be contracted to do the work. I think you have people that know how to work around solar facilities, and that's a value. But just I think our community is a little pickier than most, perhaps. And this is one area that I think we can probably close that gap relatively easily.
I don't think that's an issue to at least get it established and into a routine with our existing vegetation contractor.
Commissioner Willie, would you want the consultant to review the vegetation plan and submit a report to staff? Submit a report to staff? I'm trying to figure out the role between the consultant and the provider. And if the consultant says, do this, but they say, nah, never mind, I want to do what I want to do. Is there some, what is the role of the consultant?
Yeah, I would like to see some kind of feedback mechanism that came back so that we knew what those conversations
I
were
just
like.
made
if need be,
Commissioner
But I'm
Kelly
looking at others to see if
very-
Yeah, so
clever ideas.
well, I don't want to get too cute and, you know, we established some regulations and some expectations. And, you know, aside from these four, they've agreed to meet them. We have a review process. So if what we're trying to do is make sure that we're meeting the standards, we have a review process to meet those standards. You know, I'm going to talk a little bit here about local versus regional versus national and those types of things. But I guess I don't want to, at the same time, I want to honor what the community is asking for. I want to make sure that we're not creating so many hoops that make this so difficult. So I'm trying to get at what you're hoping to achieve here and how does the review process not meet that need?
So agrivoltaics was not specifically required, but it was very interesting to all of the above that worked on these regulations. And what we have in here is a maybe. We don't have, and I don't think we're asking to tie them to anything more strongly than that. But I think the land use and the vegetation management is pretty standard. I think what we're being offered is pretty standard for, and that's, it's good. But I'm also kind of looking for how are we using this opportunity to learn as a community and see what's possible there. Because it's one of the largest things that does come up is the use of ag land for solar. And so really doing the best we can on that land. And I guess it's still a little sore in the community about good ways and bad ways to manage grasslands amongst people who are hired to do that at the Prairie Park spraying. And so I'm just looking for, I think that Kansas Biological Survey connection is great. How exactly we write that in, that is not to tie your hands, but to help kind of keep you creative as you look at this land use.
That makes sense. I think what I would, with these small sites, they're obviously unmanned. The operating budget for the life of the site is relatively small because they are unmanned. So I wouldn't want to sign up a consultant every year for 25 years is the idea. But I don't see an issue with, for the first couple of years, having a consultant to get the process started and get a plan underway.
Do we have any other commissioners that are interested in that conversation, or Sarah, or should we be happy with what we have?
This Commissioner Reed. I think I get where you're going, Commissioner Willie. I think I'm struggling with how you condition that and how, in this instance, there's quite a few conditions on this. And so I'm trying to think, how does that fit in? Does it, what's the enforcement mechanism, sort of, I mean, not enforcement, but, sort of oversight and ability to assess that. And then to Commissioner Kelly's point, it feels like the review process is sort of the mechanism for accountability and maybe some continued conversation about how to rework parts of the plan based on how it's going in the first year or 5 years. I know that's broad. It's not specific to the vegetation management. I hear where you're going and I appreciate it and want to, I hear where you're going, but I'm struggling with how to really condition it in a way that means anything, that we can measure what the meaningfulness of that is and how, who's going to identify who that person is and how is that sort of assessed or valued.
I guess I'm thinking something like an annual conversation, and maybe that's part of the annual review, is that someone knowledgeable about native plant communities and soil health is involved in that process. And maybe that just is part of what our staff or the third party review is tasked with. But I think they really can't offer any changes beyond what we agreed to tonight, is my understanding.
Commissioners, one suggestion, again, this is a lot of what I do in terms of environmental consulting and not specifically on vegetation management. That's not me. But I think one of the things we could do is commit to consult with the Kansas Biological Survey periodically throughout our project, whether that's, annually or every couple of years, or as we see things on our site that don't look right. That's a great resource that you guys have here in Lawrence that we could commit to talking to and consulting with periodically. I don't necessarily think from my standpoint that we need to have a contract in place with someone who's going to come in and review something and write a report back to staff or write a report back to the commission. But I think in working with Evergy and working with Free State, they want to do the right thing. They want to make sure that this project is successful and that we do learn from this project, because this isn't going to be the last one. So I think that would be maybe a compromise solution where we could commit to working with the Kansas Biological Survey or other experts periodically as needed throughout the life cycle of the project. But I don't think it necessarily rises to the level for this 12-acre project of needing to have a consultant on board to, prepare that type of written narrative. Because again, it's not cheap to bring those types of experts on board for that type of project.
Then my understanding is that some sort of review, you would be required to sort of at least demonstrate that you talked to them. You met with them. When did you meet with them? That would be sufficient.
Sarah, can you maybe come up with some wording, or maybe I should ask Mary, that kind of captures that for a condition?
Well, that's what I was going to ask Mary, is if we need to add a separate condition that says that in addition to the vegetation management plan, the applicant will consult with a local subject matter expert in local vegetation and demonstrate that to staff at the annual review.
Right, with the annual review and then the 5-year review. So we would want them to provide us, when we do the reviews, provide us the information they got from their local expert, right?
Yeah.
I could do that.
Mary, I'm not real keen on if we add conditions at this point, we can do that without going back to planning commission and so forth.
Yeah, we can. You can add conditions. I would just put it into the resolution and then you'll see it another day with this new condition.
So I pitched this to my other commissioners. If this is just me, we can pass on it. If this is something that you think gives us some meaningful feedback, that it is meaningful to me, but I recognize that I am the only one talking about this at the moment.
I understand why it's meaningful. I wouldn't say it's not meaningful to me. I just am thinking practically, like, how do you make it meaningful, right? Like have a condition that is easy to follow up on. But I'm okay with the sort of wordsmithing that just happened to sort of specify that I just think it needs to be in conjunction with it, and maybe it's just clarified language for the already imposed annual or expected, imposed is not a great word, expected annual review and then 5-year review, that there's something, that we highlight the vegetation management plan and utilize some sort of consultant with, I think if it goes along with the review cycle, then that makes enough sense to me and I'm comfortable with that. I think requiring some sort of contracted consultant or a different sort of frequency feels off to me, so.
And I can follow along with that. And I think maybe it's the size of the project, where it probably falls within some of the free resources that are available in Douglas County, either biological survey or extension or others, master gardeners, something along those lines. But a larger project, maybe this is where we kind of flag that a larger project might be, need to show more of that information in the vegetation plan, like how what's the feedback mechanism for showing that we're tackling issues. Just there isn't a soil health component long range in the vegetation plan, and that's kind of what's triggering this. I think if this were a larger project, I would pitch it back and say, I want a better vegetation plan. But because of the size of the project, I think we can come up with something that is loose enough to give you the flexibility you need, but kind of gives us a little bit of learning capacity too. And I don't know if Mary, if you'd read back something, or if you have some of Sarah's language, or if you've recrafted that and something that might work for us.
Yeah, I think I'll watch the video again to make sure I have it right, but what I have is the applicant will consult with a local expert regarding the vegetation plan management success and will provide report with the annual and 5-year reviews.
Does that sound acceptable? It doesn't mean you have to consult them annually. It just means that you'll be asked annually if you're getting your questions answered as needed by a local consultant.
Yes, I think that's fine.
Okay. It's fine with me too.
Any other issues we want to talk about? So I want to say something about limited and local, because I think we are going to have other applications come before us. And I am not saying this prejudging those applications. I want to be clear. But I do think this idea that we only can generate energy for our community alone, and that we shouldn't create anything that would create energy for someone else, that doesn't sit for me. And the reason is because we do not limit any other business in this community by saying you cannot, share your product with anybody, that all products need to be here. We go to the grocery store all the time and we buy products that come from other places. And I think it's isolationist. And I think we need to understand that part of this is a business, and that we want to encourage business in Douglas County, and that we need to think about when we say things like, I only want the energy to be used here locally, what we're saying about our community's opportunity to grow their economy by taking advantage of other markets. And so while I understand that feels like we have more control, I don't agree with that. And so this one is for limited, and that's fine. But I just want to sort of set the table for the future that I personally don't believe that we need to only limit our opportunities for renewable energy resources to local options only. That doesn't mean that a large industrial project that comes to us makes sense for our community, or is going to meet the regs, or is going to, fly through here. I want to address that public comment, because I think that's a bit, I just don't support that viewpoint.
So Commissioner, I agree with that. I value, like hearing about, this is impacting local people's bills especially, but in terms of how we generate electricity, everybody generates, they put it into the grid. Everybody within the Southwest Power Pool pulls out of the grid. There's no way to track where those electrons are going. So in many ways, the stories we tell ourselves about what's generated where and what's used where, including, paying a little extra on your bill to say that the energy I'm using here came from wind generated elsewhere. Some of that are just stories we tell ourselves, like we are all in this together. It's a product that we're all using. The Southwest Power Pool is all interconnected from Oklahoma up to North Dakota or so. I would say it's like parts of 7 states or more than that. And actually other power pools to the west of us are wanting to connect into the Southwest Power Pool for its stability. This is in my understanding, this is the way the energy game is played, is that we are resilient and stronger when we're interconnected, which means that we may be generating for a neighbor today, a neighbor may be generating for us tomorrow, and having the capacity that everyone could generate a little bit more in a peak period is also important. So we have a lot of discussions, I think, yet coming up about energy. It's certainly something I spend a lot of time thinking about, learning about, asking experts about. But it's much bigger than just Douglas County.
Yeah, I appreciate both my fellow commissioners' comments and, just to put a point on it, we are all utilizing energy every day that comes from elsewhere. I mean, it is the way that our grid is set up. It is the way that the energy is produced and harvested and moved and utilized in our country, and there's plenty of conversations to be had about that and alternative options and the ethos behind that and sort of preferences for local produced, local, kept local. I get it. But to Commissioner Kelly's point, that is, if we apply that lens and that ethos to every product and resource that we consume, then that gets pretty contradictory pretty fast, right? Like there are very few ways in which we can really control in that way. So and just again, to reiterate, we get our energy from elsewhere, and have our part of the country in particular has been relying on other parts of the country and their resources that we are trying to move away from because of the harm that they create. And those resources have been coming to our community across multiple states for a long time, and still are, right? So this is, we are all in this together, as sort of, trite as that might sound to some folks, that we all have responsibility to harness the resources that we have in responsible ways, in the least harmful way, and the most impactful way on a, sustainability and just, possibility for people to maintain the way that they live. So I think it's a nuanced conversation, but I appreciate your comments, Commissioner Kelly, that it's a very particular type of application we have in front of us, and it is going to look different from future ones that we will inevitably see. And that's a piece of the conversation that it's not black and white. It's not a binary thing to me. There's just a lot of nuance to it, and we have to have conversations about how all kinds of resources and products and things that we consume as humans move around both our country and our world.
One other comment that I have is around agrivoltaics. And I said earlier, like the bond may be a casualty if it's your first time. Pollinators only we're still talking about grazing, maybe the gift we give you the first time, right? Because I think we have high aspirations, and we recognize, I don't want to speak for my other commissioners, I recognize that when the regulations were written, agrivoltaics are I'm not going to say they're infancy, but they're a toddler, right? And so I'm going, as we get more and more projects before us, I'm going to have higher and higher expectations for agrivoltaics. So I'm fine with what you've got here, but I'm going to want to see more as we see them, because I think, to Commissioner Willie's point, it's about creating, capturing that carbon back into the soil and creating essentially a land trust and really reinforcing that soil more than what it is today, and more than what it would be just with pollinators on it.
I totally agree, and thank you. So if other future applications may be watching this, agrivoltaics is something that we are definitely interested in seeing. As far as that goes, this is a fairly low bar, standard bar, and we're accepting it for a small project, but anything larger, we would need to see some real effort in that. And it's not unusual, it's just unusual here. So it's kind of normalizing that this is what the future is going to look like if projects get approved in Douglas County. But for this project, I hope you'll keep the conversation going and take a lot of pictures. If you do get some grazing going out there, I think we'd love to be kept in the loop. I'd also kind of like to be present when some of the installations going on. I'd just like to kind of see and hear that. That's not something I would want to put in the conditions, but I'm hoping you'll allow me to drive by and listen to some of that too. So, thank you.
Also very pro agrivoltaics and hope that we see more and more. And I will have higher expectations with larger projects too. With that, I'm ready to make a motion unless I see any other questions or thoughts bubbling up. I move to approve a conditional use permit CUP 23-00079 for limited scale solar energy conversion system at the northeast corner of East 400 Road and North 1700 Road.
Before I second Commissioner Reed, I think we need to address those other conditions.
Oh, thank you. Yep.
Do you want to amend your, you want to do, yeah,
Notes and make sure.
or I could offer an amendment if that would be okay.
Sure, if it feels
I'm not
ready
totally
and
sure
you're-
on my parliamentary procedure, but I'm going to second it first and then offer an amendment to your motion. And then we'll need a second on that, which is to adjust condition number 10 to allow on-site electrical lines above ground per the staff report, and to allow the language for condition 16 that it was listed in the staff memo regarding third-party reviews. And I think we'll just need a second for that.
Yet another amendment to that,
Sure.
and yet accepting the other conditions 1 through 20, other than what was noted, and not condition 21, is that correct? Just bond requirement.
I think
No,
we still
sorry, the
need,
bond, it depends on the wording. We're still asking for a bond
yeah,
requirement.
I don't think we
But we're
removed
not
21.
modifying that.
Not changing.
Right.
Okay, got it.
Mary's got her hand up.
Yep.
Mary?
And you wanted to revise the review to note that provision about the local expert?
Or add a condition to that effect.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what I was just gonna add.
Yes, I'll amend it to include, as we discussed in the meeting, the local expert part of the review. Does that give you enough, Mary? Because we have the minutes of the meeting. Okay.
Second Commissioner Kelly's amendments. Thank you for catching that. And
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you
And
all.
thank you for
Thank you.
bringing
Thanks
us
for
a fun
members of the public
project.
for coming.
So
Thanks,
Mary,
Mary.
she'll revise the resolution and we'll place that back on consent on a future agenda.
Thank you. Okay, that ends our regular agenda items. We'll move on to appointments. Commissioners, I'll start. I visited with Chelsea Hayden today. If you remember, Chelsea is one of our 2 planning commissioners that her term will expire. She's filling I say unexpired term, but that doesn't feel right, but I think that is right. We all listen to planning commission meetings. I think Chelsea is still, as she said, learning, but she's really enjoying it. And I appreciate her perspective. She spent time on the land trust. She lives in the unincorporated area and takes that very seriously as part of her role. I'm really pleased that she would like to continue, and I'm happy to nominate her for a full appointment for the Lawrence Douglas County Planning Commission.
happy to second that.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any other appointments, commissioners? Okay, we'll move on to the weekly memo and we'll start with Sarah.
Thank you, commissioners. My memo is in the packet. Just want to make sure I call special attention to the special election canvass scheduled for Thursday, May 25th at 9 a.m. If commissioners can't make that, we can find someone else to be on the canvas, but I want to, that's kind of, we don't normally meet on Thursdays, so I want to make sure you see that date. We are holding the date for June 5th for a joint meeting of the City of Lawrence, Douglas County, and USD 497 governing boards. I don't
Sorry,
have
I need you to back up to the
Okay.
canvas. What was the date and time?
the 25th of May at 9.
9 a.m.
If you can't make it,
I can move my prairie visit if I have to. I will.
I can make that.
okay, great.
I'm good.
And that's the only thing I really have on dates at this point. Just want to remind commissioners that we do not have a work session next week. I do think we're going to have a relatively robust agenda. And then the next 2 weeks, we will be off and we will have a work session when we come back on June 14th. And that's all I have for you, commissioners.
Commissioners, anything else? I know some of us are attending the homeless listening session tomorrow, and I think
Yes.
we've noticed that. I do just want to say how much I appreciate it. I know all three of us attended Douglas County's Public Health Dinner and Data, as did staff members. Thank you, staff members, for being there. That was a really great event. Austin, thank you for covering that event as well. It was really great. It was a great way to talk about data and to think about what we might do in this space. And I hope it was helpful for the health department, but I just really enjoyed the format and thank them for doing that.
I did want to add, commissioners, that there will be some dates first week in June related to open space, some community events. I don't have those completely firmed up yet. So since you may not get a weekly memo from me I'll try to get them in next week's, but if I don't, I'll make sure commissioners get copies of those.
Okay, if there's nothing else, commissioners, we are adjourned.